Hi, I'm Mitch Gallagher. Welcome to the Sweetwater Minute. This time on the Sweetwater Minute, we are joined by Bill Putnam Jr. from Universal Audio.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming in, Bill.
Yeah,
Appreciate
absolutely.
you being here, CEO and founder of the company, and you're kind of the man who resurrected the brand.
That's right. My dad had started Universal Audio amongst the various things he did around recording in the studios in the 50s, actually, and he started recording in the 40s after World War II. We recorded a lot of the greats, early blues and Duke Ellington big bands, and then started Universal Audio and kind of meet the needs of his own studio, where he realized you had to make your own gear back in that day. You couldn't go out to wonderful places like Sweetwater.
There was no Sweetwater.
Yeah, so he had to make it himself, and he realized other studios must have been struggling with the same thing, so he started to manufacture equipment for other studios.
Right.
And that's the birth of the original Universal Audio.
Okay, right. Yeah, he actually started, and he's credited with a number of firsts. Some interesting things that you come across. The first man to use artificial reverberation in the
to use it as
a
creative tool, and that was on a actually an album that isn't just famous for that. It was one of the first million sellers. It was Harmonicats, "Peg of My Heart." And if you listen to folks like Bruce Swedien, that was the tune he heard on the radio that inspired him. It's like, oh my gosh, I got to know how to do this. I want to go meet the person who did that. And then it led him to my dad's door, in Chicago. And it was actually I hear that story all the time. What people don't know is my dad had bankrolled that album, that Harmonicats album, and put it on his own label, and it funded a lot of what he ended up doing after that. So
the building of the studio in Chicago, right? Right. Yeah, another interesting one was a Patti Page record, "Confess," where he's credited as doing the first vocal double.
Yeah, that's right. I remember actually when I was meeting with the sales folks today, telling a story about Les Paul and my dad arguing back and forth at who did the first multi-track, and of course Les is credited with it. But at least when they'd get together, Les would say, "No, I think you might have been before me." My dad goes, "No, you did it first." And I remember asking Les after my dad had passed away, "Hey, Les, I remember you and my dad arguing about who did this first." He goes, "That's easy, it was me." So
that sounds like Les.
Yeah, he's great.
Right. So the story was that I heard about that was they had like a 17.5-inch disc, recorded her vocal to it, and then played that back, and she sang with accompaniment and put that onto a wire recorder to get the 3 tracks down the first, which had to be an incredible process.
Yeah, I heard a lot about Patti Page. I hadn't heard that exact story, and I know my dad recorded a lot of that stuff.
Yeah, and a lot of stuff in Chicago. He did a lot of the, like you said, Duke Ellington. He worked on Chuck Berry stuff and the rock and roll, the blues stuff.
And what's amazing is, my dad loved jazz, so that's what he'd take me to. The first live music I saw was Duke Ellington. Wow. Sitting in front of the sax section and just getting that sound, in my head and getting infected by that, So I heard a lot about the jazz, I heard a lot about the big band. He didn't really talk about the rock and roll a lot, and so later on, it was after he passed away that I read that he did all the Chuck Berry stuff that I listened to, Maybelline and...
Right, and Hank Williams also, right?
Quite possibly. I don't know specifically.
Yeah, well, he has a huge catalog, so lots of stuff that he worked on.
But then a lot of the chess stuff, and I know I was contacted by a fellow, Peter Grolnick, who was writing a book about that, and said, "Man, Phil Chess used to talk about your dad and how much he recorded up." Because Chess had their own studio, but they did a lot of stuff at Universal too. So a lot of the stuff I grew up that turned me on to music, and it was blues and then rock and roll. I had no idea until later that my dad, had recorded a lot of that.
Yeah, what an incredible legacy.
So yeah, a lot going on there.
Yeah. Well, then he moved to Los Angeles and started building studios and kind of did the same thing again in LA, right?
Right. Well, the story there was he'd been recording Frank Sinatra in Chicago, and Frank wanted to live in California, and he wanted to record in California. So he told my dad, "You have to move to California." Okay. And so my dad went out there and started United and then Western Recorders, and largely kind of at the behest of Frank. Right. And that was an important aspect in my being, because that is how my dad met my mom. My mom was working for Frank as an assistant. My mom had, been around. You hear a lot about my dad in the music business. She'd been around the music business. She could edit. She could mix. And in fact, I think she was a faster editor than my dad. Right. We had a tape machine, and I'd see them cutting and taping.
With the razor blade.
The razor blade. Yeah, growing up seeing that. And so my mom met my dad through Frank.
Okay.
And that was in the early '60s, And he started the studios and then moved the manufacturing operation out to North Hollywood in the San Fernando Valley.
Right. And those studios, especially Studio 3, right, are still kind of held out as one of the best sounding rooms that was ever created.
Yeah, both of those, all the rooms, both in United, which later became Ocean Way, and Studio 3 was in Western, which is now East-West. Those rooms are exactly like they were back when I would go into them when they were a kid. And Studio 3 was the real rock and roll room. That was Beach Boys, Pet Sounds, Jan and Dean, and Mamas and the Papas. And there was this amazing plaque on the wall. You'd go in this one door and the control room would be on the right, the studio live room on the left, and you'd look into this plaque. And just read all these names that were on there, and the Beach Boys. I just it's amazing seeing some of the pictures from the sessions in 3.
Yeah.
Classic stuff.
What an amazing history. So along the way, he also created the 610 console. He's really kind of credited as being the father of the modern recording console.
Right, and they're the real distinction. The modular recording console, because it was you couldn't pull out the modules and service them, and one thing went down, and you were taking apart the whole console. So the idea of having these replaceable modules, and which later really is the fundamental aspect of the design of modern recording consoles.
Right.
So yeah, that was he was again just building them to fit a need and a problem in his studio.
Right.
And indeed, that was the 610 console. It's used on so many recordings.
Yeah, tremendous history there too.
Yeah.
And resulted in the 610 preamp that Universal Audio is still making today.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So how did you end up resurrecting the brand? How did you get into doing that?
Well, I think maybe this story goes back to, again, my dad, and he infected me with the love of music.
Infected you?
I mean, just in the best possible way. And it was like, I feel lucky each and every day that I get to work in a field that's related to music, related to creativity. My background's technical, so that's kind of where I excelled when I was growing up, and I got that also from my dad. I spent a lot of time with him building radios when we were a kid.
Okay.
So I wasn't building audio gear; I was building radios and trying to talk around the world and building receivers, and so it just kind of instilled in me. I recognized the magic of technology. I mean, and the magic, I mean, was, there's so many things that are possible today. We sometimes lose sight of how incredible what we have in front of us, what's on our desk. The fact that we can have a small laptop, a single rack mount device, and record amazing music. To me, I still get goosebumps at how fantastic that is. But for me, it went back to radio and building a shortwave receiver with my dad. I got it for Christmas. I think maybe I was 8. Building a radio, and my dad prepared me before I turned it on. He said, "Look, there's this thing called troubleshooting because stuff never works the first time. So before you get your hopes dashed," and we turned it on and it worked. And we put this yellow wire up into this tall tree in our side yard, and we're listening to this woman with a British voice, and it's a BBC. And I think that instant when I turned that on, and it really was magic, like unbelievable. You make this thing, you listen in this headset, and you hear this voice from across the world. Just taught me that it just gave me a love of technology. So when I went to school in physics, did my undergrad in physics, and then realized what I really wanted to do was engineering, and more specifically digital signal processing. So I switched over into electrical engineering, but it still had to be connected with music. And so I went to I went to Stanford, and was in their computer music group, CARMA, the Center for Computer Research in Music and Acoustics.
Right.
And then hit this point in my life where I had to figure out what I was going to do, and it was being academic and teach, which I really loved, and I was doing some at Stanford, or get into business and be entrepreneurial. And I saw it was so much a part of who my dad was, and just and I didn't realize then, but it turned out it's a very creative act in itself.
Right.
And so I made the choice, and it was really clear I wanted to have it be around music technology, recording technology, and just talking with my brother, looking at all the great things my dad had done, and my brother and I would have these endless arguments about analog versus digital, and I was like, he'd tell me all the things digital couldn't do, and he was right. Back in the mid-90s, it couldn't do this, it didn't sound great, and I knew it didn't have to be that way. And so my vision, and my brother swore up and down I was wrong, was I can make digital sound every bit as warm as, and have that vibe and that spirit that you're hearing in all these analog recordings. And that was really the mission in the first place. And I didn't want to so that was the vision. But to me, analog plays an important role. So it was always clear from the start we weren't going to be we're in the digital camp, we're in the analog company, there's too much of that going on in those days.
Right.
Because we're going to be both. I wanted to be analog and digital. I wanted to learn about tubes by making tube gear. I want to learn about tubes by trying to emulate them and make the best plugins I can.
Right.
And so we applied a lot what I was learning in school in physical modeling and there was physical modeling of musical instruments to physical modeling of recording equipment. And I just knew that we could make this stuff sound good. And so that's been the goal ever since then. That was 12, 13 years ago.
Right, right. So you started out, you reissued some of the famous gear, the LA2A, the 1176.
Exactly.
And then also had the second division of the company really doing the plugins. You had started in at about 2003, something like that, was where they came out?
Maybe 2002. I'm kind of bad with years, but I know it was 98 when we really kicked this off, and I think 99 when we announced ourselves at AES in New York. And then soon after that, the 1176 piece of analog gear started shipping. By that time, we were already working on the digital side and trying to really understand what it took to emulate tubes and transformers and the things that make a difference in the sound. So I think you're right. It was about 2002 when we came out with UAD and UAD1, and which is almost 10 years ago, or actually 10 years ago, and came out with the 1176 plugin, LA2A plugin, and really took it from there.
Right, and now you've kind of actually brought it back together because you have the Apollo line of products. It's really combined that analog approach that you guys have, along with those plugins, all in one piece. So it's really kind of, you got the two parts and they've kind of come back together again with the latest.
Well, thanks for recognizing that, because that was when I think back 10 years ago or more, Apollo was the product I had in mind. So it only took 12 years.
Yeah, right, not bad.
but it's exactly that. We did the analog side, we did the digital side, and I always knew they'd live together in the same box. And what I want is people to be able to use our products, and when they're creating music, recording themselves or recording someone else, I want them to be able to listen to themselves and be inspired. So not like listen to themselves and being able to put up with what they're doing, but I think in that moment, what you hear in the quality and the sound quality has the possibility for either inspiring in a good way or holding back in a bad way a performance.
Right.
So I wanted people to be able to monitor with really high with our plugins, and so I always knew that we wanted to put the DSP in the recording interface and have a low latency path and have all of what we do available to that person at the moment of creative impulse.
Right. Right.
So yeah, indeed, it was the coming back together of the two. And,
so it's kind of gone first full circle there. Yeah. You've also recently gone full circle, going back to the studios with the plug-in that does the Ocean Way rooms, right? Right. Can you tell us about that? Yeah.
Well, let me say a little bit about what it's about, and I mean, cut me off here because I'll go on about this.
That's all right.
Because this is probably the single the plug-in that I've had the single most personal input on, and it's been my project for the last few years.
Right.
And well, first of all, what it is a room simulation plugin, and the rooms we're simulating are two of what I hear the greatest rooms ever. Two rooms my dad designed was the two rooms A and B from United Recording, and since the early '80s, Ocean Way.
Right.
So Alan Sides has been running those rooms, and they're great rooms. Everything from Sinatra to Basie. I remember I worked for Alan Sides for a while when I was in my teens.
Really?
Yeah, and seeing Ella Fitzgerald there, and so great rooms with great history. Also Clapton and the Stones, and all sorts of stuff since then. And Alan has built up this incredible knowledge of how to make those rooms, which already sound good, just sound great. And he's built up this incredible, probably the best microphone collection in the world.
Right.
And so, his knowledge of how to place it, and we wanted to really do something different, because I felt there, I'd listened to a lot of the convolution reverbs and thought that sounds like a decent reverb, but there's something missing. And I grew up in these control rooms, and the moment when the mics go on, when they pull up the mics on the board, and even if there's just ambient sound in there, the sound of that room and the spaciousness and the three-dimensionality of the whole thing, I hadn't heard in anything. Except I know it when I hear it, and you get in these rooms and it's the sound of a room. And you can go back and listen to a lot of Frank Sinatra. My favorite is like modern sounds in country and western music, Ray Charles. You listen to that and you hear the room. You don't hear some reverb, even if it's a great reverb. It's different than what live musicians sound like when they're playing in a real room, in a good room. And so that was the holy grail there.
Okay.
And so I started thinking about the problem, and I thought one of the first limitations we have when people go measure a room, they have they're accurately able to reproduce the sound of a speaker in a room. And that's not enough. What you really have in a room are live instruments, and those live instruments, a speaker might be unidirectional, sending sound out in one direction, but instruments do something different. You smack a snare, its radiation pattern is isotropic in this dimension, then some goes up, some goes down. It excites all the modes in a room different than just a single speaker measurement would do it.
Okay.
And so what you really want to do to capture a lot of this is take that into account. So the first thing we had to do is come up with techniques to be able to measure and reproduce that type of thing. And then we added, other technology on there that lets you choose from his mic cabinet,
right,
and then also move the mics around. So you can move them forward and back. You're able to have 3 different sets of mics up at any time and mix between those. So you can have a close, mid, and then a room mics, and even some special effects like some mics he has up in the loft that are interesting here and there. We used those, so we captured a lot of stuff, and I think it's a very flexible tool with very authentic sound. And it's we'd be sitting. I voiced every preset or every sound with Alan. It took weeks and weeks, and sometimes his jaw would just drop and go, "That's B." He just you'd hear it. That's it, man. That is the sound of that room.
Right. That's high praise.
So it was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
We learned a lot, and it was a very satisfying project.
Right. And a lot of being able to do that is the amount of horsepower that you now have.
Absolutely.
With the U-82 and the Octo and the Apollos and things. So
quads and
yeah, very cool that all of that is so, the original technology your dad developed, the rooms he developed, and then the approach that you have to modeling that stuff and bringing it all together. It's just a great story, the way that's all come full circle.
Well, the day we released it, Alan kept calling me. He was really excited. He was very proud of this. We just put in a lot of work,
right,
both doing all the measurements, but also doing all the voicing. And so it was great to finally get it to market. And it took us a while. We were actually working on this about 3 years. But the day he released it, he was really excited. He called me up and he said, it just struck me. I was thinking about this. This is like you, me, and your dad were able to collaborate on something together. Your dad built the rooms. I learned how to record in those rooms and have them and know where to put the mics. And you built the software that makes it all work. And that was a really cool thought.
Yeah, how
I was
cool
really
is
excited about that.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's great.
It's very satisfying.
Congratulations. That's all wonderful. The products are great. The plugins, the hardware, the interfaces. You just moved to a new building. The company's growing like crazy.
That's right. Yeah, we've been growing over the last, we've consistently grown in the last few years. It's been picking up the pace, and it's going well. A great group of folks to work with. We have a lot of fun. We really want to make great products and make stuff that sounds good.
Yeah, well, you're succeeding.
That's fun.
And thanks for all your support here at Sweetwater as well. We
likewise.
really appreciate it. Yeah.
Yeah, you guys are great.
Thanks for coming in, Bill.
Well,
it's
thank
been
you.
a pleasure to chat with you, and just congratulations again on all the success.
Well, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
I'm Mitch Gallagher. Thanks for joining me for the Sweetwater Minute.